Hello, everyone. Just want to let you all know that we are recording now as we get ready to start the meeting.
I think that's better.
Hi, Carla. That email worked with the attachment.
Thank you.
Mr. Kuhn, Ms. Howard, looks like we have a quorum. We ready to get started here?
I think we're ready.
Awesome.
Yep, I am ready as well.
Great. Well, welcome everybody to the February 9th meeting for the Measure O Citizens Oversight Committee. Looking at the agenda, the first thing is roll call.
Shall I do the roll call?
Yes, please.
All right. Chair Hickman,
Here.
Vice Chair Franchi,
Here.
Member Cuevas,
Here.
Member Carrillo,
Here.
Member Mather. I believe she was going to be traveling. Member Tubb,
Here.
Member Ibarra Talias. No Member Jordana either. Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Looks like there was one public communication emailed over. We just got the attachment. What's the procedure for that?
Yes, so the attachment will be included in the supplemental packet available to the public. Like I said, there was one email from resident Matthew Bayo who had some concerns about the sidewalk program that was discussed at the last Measure O meeting.
Okay, so that's for us just to read at our leisure and absorb for future meetings then?
Correct. It is not on the agenda, so we could not have a discussion on it tonight.
Okay, great. And it looks like Jordana just joined the meeting for record keeping sake. Oh, maybe she just popped out. Uh-oh. Oh, there she is.
No, I'm here. Good evening.
Thank you. Welcome.
All right, well, let's move into the minutes. First is a recommendation to approve, basically approve the meetings from the last, approve the minutes from the last two meetings. They were omitted from the last meeting. So do they need to be separately done, or could they be done with one motion?
One motion will suffice.
Thank you. So does anyone on the committee have a motion to approve the minutes? For the last
Make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from Tuesday, September 22nd, 2020, and also Thursday, November 5th, 2020.
I'll second the motion.
Shall we vote?
Yes.
Chair Hickman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Franchi,
Yes.
Member Cuevas,
Yes.
Member Carrillo,
Yes.
Member Tub,
Yes.
Member Ibarra Tobias,
Yes.
and Member Mather is absent.
Great, thank you very much. Looks like the next three items are fairly general, and I believe I'll turn it over to Mr. Kuhn to lead this next three. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the first item will be reviewing the audit results for last fiscal year, for fiscal year 2019, 2020. With so many 20s in there, it gets a little confusing saying it sometimes. But so we reviewed this with you already. We kind of ran over the preliminary numbers last fall, and then we kind of also reviewed them again last November. But like I said, like I said, here's the agenda, obviously, and then but according to the Measure O ordinance, right? When we went and created Measure O, one of the key components of the process was to have a separate audit conducted for Measure O and to be reported back to this committee. So while we did already report on the city's main audit to City Council, there was a separate independent audit done for Measure O as well, just as a standalone entity. We worked with our CPA firm, Clifton Larson Allen. It is the same CPA firm we've been using, but for those of you who've been around, it may be a different name because they were acquired by a larger firm. But our audit and kind of the audit team we had is the same. We did change partners this year because due to best practices and various laws, we cannot have the same audit partner from a firm for an extended period of time. We all know it happened back in the Enron, and one of the changes was to make sure the audit partners are rotating so that there are different eyes looking at it to keep things fresh. So we had that this year, which always is interesting and helpful when we have a new audit partner come and look at things because they always take a new perspective of things, kind of do a deeper dive. And one of the things that the new audit partner pointed out is that for Measure O, because it is its own independent audit, is that staff should prepare each year a management and discussion letter to include as part of the audit. So historically, that has not been included. By the time staff received the comment, there was not enough time to include it in this year's. That doesn't mean that the audit's not clean. The audit was still clean. It was just kind of a suggestion from the auditors, basically, that was notated to help us match best practices. So we will be including that letter in the future. Except even without that letter, like I said, the auditors did issue a clean or unmodified opinion. Basically, with all the checks that they conducted in the accounting for Measure O funds, they found that everything was conducted and accounted for in accordance to governmental accounting standards. I said, other than that, I'm going to briefly cover some of the numbers. We've already talked about them previously at prior meetings, but the chart before you here starts out with the beginning fund balance from 2 years ago for fiscal year 18-19. We started out with just under 10 million. Shows the revenues that came in of about 13.4 million, spent about 10.4, and basically we ended FY 18-19 with just under $13 million. So basically that's where we started last fiscal year in Measure O. And then last fiscal year in Measure O, despite the pandemic, we actually brought in just slightly more revenue than the prior year. In part, like I said, due to the strong sales tax related to online transactions. And then expenses were slightly higher than the revenues. And so we did see a small decrease in the fund balance at the end of the year. And we ended the year at about $12.9 million in fund balance for Measure O. And so this is just a table of the fund balance changes over time. Obviously, you see an NA at the first or at the very bottom of the screen because fiscal year 2016 there was no money. And so we started receiving money, obviously, in fiscal year 2017. And so the fund balance has grown from 2.58 to about, just under $13 million where it stands today. So obviously, like I said, we just wanted to give a high-level overview of the audit and what transpired. And I'm available for any questions that you may have. And then also the full and complete audit was included as part of the packet that has been posted on the website and sent to the committee members ahead of time.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Kuhn?
Just a quick comment. So no surprises then, right, Mr. Kuhn?
Correct. No surprises. I mean, it was a little bit different to be told that, hey, you have to do this letter. But like I said, that's nothing that affects the materiality of the presentation. But it's definitely something that is a best practice and we're going to incorporate in the future.
Right. Thank you.
And Mr. Kuhn, do you expect that ending fund balance to be roughly the same year over year? Or are there any specific targets? I know it's not an exact science, but I was just wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, in general, there is an ebb and a flow with some of the capital projects. So we do eventually plan on spending that down with various capital projects. Obviously, we do have per policy a portion that we want to keep of fund balance just available in case anything happens because of the seasonality and susceptibility to recessions of sales
Sure.
taxes or use taxes like Measure O. But the intent is over time is that we're using those funds and we're not carrying large fund balances. And so, it's one of the things that Greg's going to dive a little bit deeper into the mid-year update a little later on for us. And he will, one of the things we always look at there is kind of, that balance between the expenditures, budget and whatnot. And obviously, as we move into the budget process, there'll be lots of discussions on various kind of requests for, annual funding, let's say, but then also CIP projects that meet the needs and requirements of Measure O.
Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Coons,
Yes, sir.
I had a question. When these big capital improvements carry over and we're not using that money, is it just sit into an account or is it accumulating some type of interest as well?
So all of the money that we have in Measure O is basically getting some level of interest. Right, even in our checking account for the city, granted with the low interest rates now, the interest we're receiving on the city's checking account is very nominal. I don't remember the exact figure on the top of my head, but I want to say it was around 0.1%.
Wow.
Last I heard, like I said, so not much, but we're always getting at least something.
Okay.
When the cash is waiting to be spent on various different projects.
Thank you.
Mr. Kuhn, when I look at the chart of accounts that was attached for later, it has the Safe and Clean program broken out. And then when I look at this report, it has just public safety police and then parks, recreation, and community partnerships. I'm assuming that those two line items include the Safe and Clean program, correct?
That is correct. So we went into a little bit more detail in the reports that were distributed for this meeting per the requests of the committee members. You had requested kind of the higher level detail, and so that's something we did provide, but that is not a level of detail that typically you would see in an audit.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right, I believe there's no committee action on this one, correct?
That is correct.
All right, super. Are you ready for the next item?
All right, next item, real quick, before we kind of get into the meat of the presentations with the mid-year update today, just did want to provide an outlook for the upcoming budget cycle. I know, like I said, one of the big tasks every year is looking at the Measure O budget, reviewing and getting it approved. So today, we're meeting today. The CIP plan is kind of the next step on our roadmap to completing a budget. We go through a 2-year process for those of you that are not familiar with it. So basically, in the even years, the Public Works Department leaves a full-scale update of our capital improvement plan or our CIP. And basically, this is citywide, so it includes all projects, including Measure O, kind of long-term, large capital investments. And then in odd years like this year, we go through an interim adjustment where we review projects for correctness, accuracy, sometimes maybe make inflationary adjustments. And then, like I said, and typically it's a much smoother, smaller process, like I said, in the out year. And so that's something that Public Works will be presenting to City Council on March 22nd. And then obviously the projects in the capital improvement plan will also roll forward into the other budget preparations as well. And then so staff will be presenting to City Council the proposed budget on April 26th. And then right after that, on May 4th, we will have an overview with the Measure O committee of the budget. And then after that, on the 10th, we'll meet with City Council for a budget workshop with them. And then if needed, we'll come back to Measure O for another budget. Oh, all right. So if needed, we'll go back to City Council on May 26th for a budget workshop number 3. And then we'd come back, the proposed date to come back to the Measure O committee if needed for any final action on the budget would be June 1st. And then we're slated to adopt the budget on June 14th. So that's just a high overview of the budget calendar. Are there any questions on the calendar as we move forward into the budget process for next year?
Yes, I see Jordana with her hand raised. You want to unmute? You have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, so last year we had that issue of kind of having to see a presentation and information and then adopt it the same day. So looking at the timeline, does that mean that we're going to, is that secondary review? I can't really see the screen, but I think it's in June. Is that the time that we would be voting on, the up or down vote or providing some kind of feedback, or would we be doing that on the May 4th? I think it says May 4th. I can't see it, but.
If the committee was comfortable, you could vote on the May 4th meeting. But like I said, we could use the June 1st meeting. Like I said, there's also flexibility. Like I said, to move to the idea of kind of we to start off kind of Measure O and then go to City Council and then kind of wrap up with City Council and then kind of come back to Measure O just in case there are any loose ends so we can report back to you.
Yeah, because I think last time, I think there was some we felt a little pressured when we were able to, we read the information, it was presented the same day and we voted on it. So I think I'm comfortable as long as we have the reading materials, or at least, the budget. If we can review the budget prior to May 4th, then I feel comfortable with having a discussion and doing our up and down vote that day. But if we decide as a group to wait until the City Council has worked through their portion of it and then vote later in the year, that's fine with me. I'm just trying to figure out at what point the committee will be able to provide feedback on that budget review.
Yes, and one of the things is, you'll definitely have a little bit more time this year to review the proposed budget before your meeting. Last year, the original schedule, even before COVID, had the proposed budget presentation about a month earlier. So there's a lot more time to kind of develop that and get it out on the staff end. And then, like I said, we're at this point in time, we're not anticipating, having to do 2 basically proposed budget processes like we did last year. So we do believe we will be able to get that to you turned around in a timely manner. Like I said, let me look at the date real quick on my calendar. But
I know that we are obviously separate from the city council, but
Mhm.
you know, if we want to just listen in on the city council presentation, we could do that as well.
That is completely accurate. And then also for your information,
So it
so
could be ideal, you know.
yeah, so we're scheduled to meet on May 4th, and then we will have the proposed budget document posted for the city council agenda by April 21st. So there should be almost a full 2 weeks before your meeting that the proposed budget document will be public.
And then what are the goals of the operating budget workshops? Is that to work with the individual departments and programs to kind of work out details, or?
Yeah, so from a basically from a Measure O perspective and from a city council perspective, basically from Measure O perspective first, right? So each department will basically present their requests to the committee, and you'll have an opportunity to kind of ask your questions to each department. And then, like I said, similar format when we get to city council, right? It's just an opportunity to kind of ask all those questions that may be out there.
And follow up to that, I think we discussed giving nonprofits and community organizations outside of the city some floor space and some time to present their wish list as well. Are we doing that?
Yes, that was. I'm thinking about it, there was a discussion. I think we had that discussion in I think November 2019, January 2020, right, kind of right before the pandemic. I think that is. We're gonna let me touch base with staff in all the departments, make sure. Like I said, I'd kind of forgotten about the discussion. Let me touch base, and I will communicate on a follow-up item with the committee via email.
Is that important to anyone else on the committee?
Yeah, it's important to me.
Yeah, and something we discussed. So that's good follow-up. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and next, one of the one of the 4 principles that was adopted for Measure O was to increase public participation, which this would be part of. So, like I said, I'm going to, I don't want to just throw something out there off the cuff right now. We'll kind of gather, and I will get back to you all via email.
Great, thank you. Any other questions on the budget calendar? All right, well, hearing none, Mr. Kuhn, can you also help coordinate item number 4, please?
Yes. And so before I switch over to the next slide, for item number 4, so our financial analysis and planning manager, Greg Morley, is going to be covering the presentation for the financial aspect of number 4. And then from there, I'll come back in and introduce each department as it's kind of their turn to provide you with an update from their department.
Perfect, thank you for your help.
I turn the time to you, Greg.
Okay, and the slide. Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm Greg Morley. It's nice to talk to all of you, and it's my first time to meet some of you. The next couple of slides, I'm going to be discussing revenues and expenditures for the Measure O program. The slide that we're looking at has actual revenues for the years 2018 and 2018, 19, and 2019, 20. As you can see, as depicted in one of the slides that Michael showed earlier, you can see a gradual increase in revenue from 2018, 19 to 2019, 20. And actually, that was a pleasant surprise in year 2019, 20, because when the COVID pandemic hit, it seems like every third day there was another prediction of loss of revenue. And obviously, when you shut down an entire economy, sales tax revenue is one of the first ones to be hit. So we rebounded rather well in 2019, 20. And I can't see that slide.
Greg, excuse me, I can't
Yes.
see it either. I think when we put it on gallery or speaker view, we're seeing you, but we're not seeing the
So
spreadsheet.
for
You can
anyone who
pin it.
can't see
Okay.
it, if you if you right click on the small slide and pin it,
There it goes.
it'll make it your larger slide.
It just popped up. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for
All
bringing that up.
right.
I should have mentioned that a little
So
bit earlier.
I got my technological lesson for today, and now I can see the slide. So again, so our revenues came in pretty well in fiscal 2019-20, and we were pleasantly surprised to see that our revenue was a little higher than we had anticipated back in early spring, when everybody was anticipating a lot of reductions in revenues. This is a transaction and use tax. It's similar to a sales tax. It's categorized as other taxes in our general ledger. So those big numbers that you see at the top of the screen, $13 million for the last 2 fiscal years, that's the transaction and use tax portion of our Measure O revenue. You can see in the adopted budget, considerably less, about $1 million less than what we saw in actual revenue in 1920. Again, that was based on our projections of what was happening to the economy back in the spring, and we were being told we had a couple of different analyses done where we were seeing that our revenue was going to be dropping by as much as 4 to 5%, maybe as high as 8%, according to some people's projections. So our budgeted revenue was a little was less than we saw in last fiscal year. But as you can see, going across the slide to the total estimated year end, the economy has gotten a little better. There's been a lot of things done. You can see them in the city of Ventura, for example, the Main Street Moves program downtown, and a lot of businesses were able to at least get back to conducting partial business compared to what they were doing before the pandemic hit. So our estimated revenue for the end of the year is closer to the amount that we received as actual revenue in fiscal year 2019-20. Considerably better than what we had budgeted in the beginning. The use of money and property category, that is the interest revenue that you were discussing a minute ago. And again, as you can see, in 2018-19 and 2019-20, interest revenue was going pretty well. But as Michael said a minute ago, the interest rates have gone down. Our estimated interest revenue for the year is considerably lower than it was in prior years. Obviously, when the economy rebounds, we'll start seeing a better return on that. Other miscellaneous revenue, you see there was virtually nothing in 2018-19. In 2019-20, the $365,000 and then the $622,000 moving forward, that is representative of the County of Ventura's share of our operations for the homeless shelter over on Knoll Drive. And that's other miscellaneous revenue. Prior year resources is a revenue figure. You see that there's no actual in 2018-19 or 2019-20. We do have some of that budgeted for 2021. That's because our estimate of actual revenue received was lower than what our estimate of actual expenditures was going to be. So that $2.5 million that you see is prior year resources budgeted, that represents a portion of that fund balance that was being discussed on previous slides. Next slide, please. This is the expenditures categories broken down by how they're spent departmentally. And so the city manager department, you see there were no expenditures in 2018-19. In 2019-20, we initiated the Safe and Clean 2.0 program. And so a portion of that program is funded and managed through the city manager department. You see the $1.7 million in expenditures. A lot of that was associated with the establishment and the opening and the operation of the homeless shelter over on Knoll. We also have a program in the city manager department where we have the manager for that Safe and Clean program, Meredith Hart, is funded in that program. So part of the expenditures there are associated with Meredith's activities as well. Community Development Department, you see no expenditures in the last 2 fiscal years, and then just a small budgeted amount in 2021. That's representative of some work that the Housing Authority does, and that was actually shifted from the general fund for this particular fiscal year as part of a budget balancing exercise last spring, and it was a one-time event. Probably won't be there next year. Parks and Recreation, again, Parks and Recreation is very involved in the Safe and Clean 2.0 program as well. There's a couple of employees in Parks and Recreation that are funded from this program. In addition to that, Parks and Recreation is very actively involved in beautification of the city. A lot of that is tree maintenance, landscape maintenance. Very actively involved in a very efficient program in Parks and Recreation. Police Department, there are several programs. I'm gonna kind of hit the highlights of the Police Department programs: Neighborhood Drug and Crime Prevention Program, Gang Violence Reduction Program, Patrol Task Force, which I believe is part of the Safe and Clean 2.0 program, and Enhanced Focus Area Patrol are some of the main programs that are being operated in the Police Department. Most of the expenditures that you see in the Police Department that are Measure O related are related to personnel costs. Fire Department, that is the aspect of Measure O that says keep all fire stations open. And so that's suppression activity, and it's related to fire station number 4, and it's all personnel costs. Public Works Department is a little more diverse. Public Works Department is where we fund all of the CIP projects that Michael talked about earlier. And CIP projects are one of the aspects of a CIP project, as you know, is that they're normally not short-term projects, they're long-term projects. So in Measure O, we might budget for a CIP project in 1 year, but we know when we budget for it that it's a long-term project. It might take 18 months to 2 years to complete. Some of them get completed earlier than that, but we have a tendency to budget for a lot of that. And there was a question about Measure O funds being carried over, and most of the time when Measure O funds are carried over, it's to complete those CIP projects that we implemented in a budget adoption. Public Works Department is very heavily involved in streets, street resurfacing. There's street maintenance, sidewalk maintenance, alley maintenance, storm drain maintenance, a lot of programs like that. Some of those are purely maintenance programs, but many of them are CIP projects. And so there's usually a significant amount of the Measure O money budgeted in Public Works every year. And then the non-departmental, that expenditure is related to the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, and it's just administration for them managing our transaction and use tax. And next slide. This slide is all of the activities that I described in the first slide. These are the same dollar amounts, but they're categorized by those spending categories that are in the Measure O ordinance. So I could look at something like maintaining and improving fire, police, paramedic response times, and say that some of that is related to the neighborhood crime and drug reduction or prevention, gang violence reduction. Keeping all fire stations open, of course, you understand that that's the same dollar amount that we looked at on the previous slide, and that's the suppression activities at station number 4. Protecting local beaches, rivers, and coast waters. There are, if you go back to the other slide, a lot of those expenditures are relatable to those projects that are done in the Public Works Department. Again, keeping our neighborhoods safe from gangs and drugs, some of the police programs that I mentioned previously, effectively addressing the issue of homelessness. And that is where I mentioned that in the city manager department, we have the Safe and Clean program, and we operate that homeless shelter year round. Significant portion of those costs are relatable to that program. And then go back down to the maintaining local streets. Again, you see some large dollar amounts in maintaining local streets, roads, and essential city services. Again, relatable to a lot of the public works projects, both maintenance and CIP that I mentioned on the previous screen. And then improving services for youth, seniors, the disabled, and veterans. That $120,000 is relatable to that housing authority activity that I talked about in community development on the previous screen. And then the last category there, which isn't really one of the spending categories, but we put it there so we could make sure that it relates to the previous slide, and that's those California Department of Tax and Fee Administration admin costs that we pay every year for their administration of the revenue. And that's the last of those slides. And so I'm perfectly willing to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Morley. Looks like Jordana has her hand raised. Is that a new one?
Yes, hi. I just wanted to commend you on this spending category report. This is, I believe, Councilmember Franchi or somebody last term requested this, that the budget be tied to this, not to spending category, but to the goals of the initiative, the measure of initiative. So I commend you for putting this together. It makes things a lot easier to understand how the budget ties to our goals as a committee. I just wanted to ask quickly, just a couple quick questions. The year-to-date encumbrances for 21 of 67,000 for youth and disabled and veterans. What specifically was that for? If you could refresh my memory.
So again, that's the community development program that we have with the Housing Authority, and what they do is the Housing Authority administers programs for housing for
vouchers for those individuals to
yeah.
the housing program. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and then on the previous slide, there was a 2.9 million deficit on the year-to-date 2021. Is that actually just a timing issue because of CIPs, or is that our baseline unencumbered reserve funds, the 2.1 million?
That's a timing issue, just like you said.
Okay.
So actually that number is relatable to both the revenue category and the expenditure category. And if you looked at the previous slide number 7, you see the revenue is at about $5 million. And that's because of the timing issue. The revenue that we receive for the transaction and use tax, the cash that we receive for that comes from the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. It's always 2 months in arrears. So we're seeing actual expenditures up to December 31st in this slide, but we're only seeing revenue through October 31st.
Okay, that makes sense. And then one last kind of overarching question. To what extent does the city anticipate that there may be, I mean, I know in general our funds are coming from property taxes, but are there any other income flows, so to speak, or taxations that we expect to be affected or impacted in some way due to COVID and all the closures, like of downtown? I mean, obviously downtown is all property and property taxes, and there's been some changes at the state level about collecting property taxes. So I'm just wondering if the city's anticipating any reduction in Measure O due to COVID.
The only reduction in Measure O due to COVID would be those reduced revenues from the transaction and use tax relatable to the economy.
So does the city have a forecast as to how much that impact might be percentage-wise, or how is it factored in here, or is it factored in? I mean, because you have a forecast.
It's factored in the budget. Okay, it's factored in the budget. When we did the budget, we were expecting better than a 4.5% reduction in transaction and use revenue. But if you look at the estimated total year end, you can see that our estimated receipts are much better than that, and that's because of the most recent meetings that we've had with our tax consultants, where we've seen those projections of revenue reductions go from 4.5% to closer than 2%. So we're actually bringing in more revenue than we thought we were going to bring in, and our prediction on it for the year is that we're going to be, if we compare it to prior years, we're going to be somewhere less than 2% as far as the loss of revenue goes. And that 2% loss of revenue is really, it's really a 2% reduction in growth. It's not a loss of revenue so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Morley?
A quick question. So in the expenditures, the Measure O funds and how they're allocated, of course, this is it's either supplemented or in addition to any grants that are brought forward, right? That's funding some of these programs or personnel, et cetera.
Absolutely. That funding is absolutely separate from any grant or any other sorts of revenue that somebody might bring in to supplement those programs. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Morley. Appreciate the info.
You're welcome.
All right, yes, thank you, Greg. Now moving on to the departmental presentations. Last time the departments presented, Chief Ndaya went last, and so this time he has the pleasure of going first. And so we'll turn the time over to Chief Ndaya for a brief overview of what the fire department's doing this year with the funds provided by Measure O.
All right, thanks, Michael. Chair and committee, thank you for your time tonight. We're honestly, as Greg was talking about, we're very straightforward with what the funds are being used for, in that they're for our personnel. So what I thought I would do, rather than read you words or have you read words, I just wanted to put up a few images that really show what Measure O is providing to the community. And again, I won't read, but if you just take a look, these photos are of what we are involved in to serve the members and the visitors and the residents and business owners of Ventura when called upon. And this helps to keep one of our 6 existing fire stations open to provide that service 24/7. And it's to the whole city. It's not just Station 4, because as you know, there's a ripple effect. When 1, 2, 3, or 4 engines go out on a call, sometimes together to the larger calls, the other parts of the city are impacted with longer response times, or relying on our partnering agencies in the Ventura County area or the Oxnard City jurisdiction to come into our city, which they do automatically to provide service to our residents if we are unavailable, excuse me, or if our units are tied up on calls. So I just included, the upper left one is actually is a proud one, and that's we still do community outreach. We did a great effort with Food Share and the police department, building what I call the can tree. This year we won an award for the 3rd year in a row, and it was a great community effort with us and PD. Land Rover Jaguar let us use their showroom, and we ended up getting enough cans to feed hundreds of families with hundreds of meals, and overall the effort was great. So we're very proud when we can serve the community outside of our emergencies, in addition to what we do each day. When you look at the rest, really, we're obviously involved when there's a red flag warning, whether it be wind, heat, a combination, low relative humidity. Rip currents, we're responsible to assist. When there's lifeguards, we assist. When there aren't, we are the rescue team. We do have a USLA certified ocean rescue team consisting of 15 members. We try to keep it round about 5 members per shift, because we have 3 rotating shifts who are always available to respond. And some of our social media is obviously PSAs to help keep people safe. Clearly, we do some fire suppression. You can see the traffic accident, ready for rain, coronavirus. These are all things we do each day around the clock, 365. The bottom 2 are some training exercises. We do train while we are on duty. We have a lot to cover, so we need to keep our skills sharp. Minus the ability to have a training site here in the city, we make do, we adapt, and what you see is us doing some above level fire training in some of the only places we can access that have stairwells and can mimic apartment buildings without impacting too many residents. And so we train down at some of our parking structures. We do our best to not impede on public access or just public right of way when they're out there. So that's just a little coverage of what we do. I think our mission is well known, and we want to thank you for your continued support. We can go to the next slide, Michael. And then that's just what I was talking about super fast. I don't think there's nothing I didn't cover. Fire prevention, inspection. Also, we're part of the city's development process, but the Measure O, what it does cover is what I had on the previous slide, which is our emergency operations from Station 4. So we'll go to the last slide for our goals, and obviously continuing goal, keeping Fire Station 4 open, as that was the identified one. That's 3 rotating shifts, so that's a total of 9 people because there are 3 on every day. And then what we did do last year, instead of cutting a full-time firefighter paramedic, we did move 1 additional firefighter paramedic to Measure O. Under the direction of the city manager and city council, we are currently exploring ways to fund that back in our budget. Obviously, it's a little bit difficult. We're working with fire prevention, and I believe somewhere in our near future, and Michael can even speak to this, we are working on billing for some services that we had not previously billed for to cover the actual costs of what those services are, so that we're not losing money, at which point we may be able to recoup and have a more robust budget to bring that 1 firefighter back in. That's a long process. We're doing our best. We will continue to work toward getting that firefighter paramedic back into the general fund fire department budget. But right now, that single position, 1 person is in Measure O. And you'll see that our costs are pretty spot on because they are projected by finance. I know Greg Morley and Daryl Brumley follow it with our management analyst. And it's really, again, just people, it's salary, benefits, and we did move some overtime over at the committee's request. I believe, and Greg, you can help me with this one, it was either last year or even the year before, right after we first did it. And on the first year, we did not.
Yeah,
but
you're
again,
correct. I'm sorry, it was
okay.
last year. It was last year.
Thanks, Greg. And but otherwise, it is all personnel, and we appreciate the support, and we will continue to provide all those services to the best of our ability around the clock. So thank you for your time, and I'm available for questions.
Has there been any increase in hiring, or where are we at firefighter wise?
Position-wise, we're still the same as we've been. We in the field, we have a total of 69 sworn positions that are spread across 3 shifts. And the last, not full-time, sorry, the last positions part-time or 40 hours a week that we added were for Medic Engine 7, which is our daytime surge engine that provides coverage during the weekdays, during the day hours. So they are not on duty at night, and they are not on duty over the weekends. So full-time resources we have not done for quite some time. And then the part-time resource of the 40-hour engine we did 2 years ago now as well.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions for Chief Andaya?
I have one.
Go for it.
Hey, Chief, thank you for the presentation tonight. The paramedic firefighters, that's actually a position that the firefighter is also a paramedic. The paramedic's not separate from the firefighter.
That's correct. We hire, basically, that's a requirement for application and hiring, is to possess right now it's either a California paramedic licensure or there's a national accreditation. And if you are, it's called being national registry or nationally registered. And we accept that as well. It's basically a qualification that allows you to cross state lines, and there's reciprocity. But to apply to become a firefighter in Ventura, you need to already be a licensed paramedic. And then you have to go through not only the training academy, but the county has a very stringent qualification process to become certified in the county. It's called accredited. And basically they have to go through a process to then become accredited within Ventura County through the local emergency medical services agency. But to answer your question, yes, it's all one. It's a job classification. It's actually firefighter paramedic as a job classification that we hire for.
Okay, one other question. Do you ever see in the future the ability for these paramedics to actually rove through the city separate from a fire position where they could get to calls quicker, not being on the engine? Is that a possibility, or too cost prohibitive?
Yes and no. It's definitely in my crystal ball. I would love to do that. I think Obviously, the one thing that I always speak to is it would be in addition to what we do today. So if we could get something like, for those of you who were around, I'm dating myself, but to see emergency way back when Johnny and Roy used to drive the squad around, that was a paramedic squad that was a lot more mobile than engines. We would love to have that. You know, back in 1996 and 7, we had our own ambulance transport that was very successful, and just through lawsuits, not ours, and other things, we had to shut that program down. Throughout California, fire services are again looking at being able to do their own EMS transport within their cities to take care of their community, instead of it being dictated by the county LEMSA that I was just referring to, with perhaps private ambulance companies and whatnot. So, but it would be in it. I would support it in addition, as I mentioned earlier, the last full-time resource that we added that covered the city around the clock was in July of 1988. So I want to hold on to what we have, and we're about 3 times busier now than we were back in 1988. So if we can add and we can find a way to do that, again, whether it's through a transport program that can then feed itself. Obviously, there's no money making, but there's definitely revenue to support the ongoing programs. That's what other fire departments are doing, and that's what I'd like to continue exploring as an option as the availability comes to the state right now. Lots of fire departments are looking at it, and there's still some legal decisions that need to be made. But we're watching carefully and would love to take advantage of an opportunity like that.
Well, thank you. Good luck with that in the future.
Thank you very much.
Great. Any further questions? All right. Thank you for your time and the info, Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, now I'm going to be pinch hitting for Community Development Department. They have a meeting today with the council chairs for the general plan. So they asked me to cover their brief presentation for them today. And so, like was mentioned, there was $120,000 included in the budget this year that falls under the Community Development Department. This is for affordable housing management. So basically, instead of hiring 2 full-time positions to manage all the reporting on affordable housing, we contract with the affordable housing, organization to an authority to do that for us. Like I said, so everything is going according to plan this year, obviously, and we anticipate to spend $120,000 of the $120,000 budgeted. And like I said, that is all there is on the update from community development. Any questions on that one, or we're ready to move on? Okay. All right. Next one coming up will be Meredith Hart from the City Manager's Office, reviewing some of the Safe and Clean programming.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Meredith Hart, Safe and Clean Program Manager. And for our Safe and Clean program for year 2021, we have about $1 million of expenditures. And so currently all the contracts and the programs that we provide through Safe and Clean are ongoing. So it continues to provide for me as a Safe and Clean Manager, our homeless shelter services at the Arch, which is pictured here, our outreach worker partnership with the county, Riverhaven Transitional Living through Turning Point Foundation, and our Safe Sleep program through the Salvation Army. Now, about $622,000 of the expenditures are reimbursed by the county for their portion of the Mercy House expenses for our Arch shelter. Next slide. For this year, we have leveraged some of the Measure O funds through 2 venues. We have the use of CDBG and CDBG CV funds for our shelter services and also for our winter weather response plan. And that's a total of about $621,000. And we also received a HAP grant, which is the Homeless Housing and Assistance Prevention Grant through the State and Continuum of Care for an additional outreach service worker that is tied directly to the city of Ventura. So now we will have 2 of those. And that is a 2-year program for about $222,000. And then, of course, what was mentioned before, we have the offset revenue from the county as they pay us back for the Mercy House support of the shelter expenses. So we are on track to reach all of our goals and to with our spending. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions, anyone?
Yes, Ms. Hart, thank you. I was curious how the current balance is between PD resources are and civilian resources are in reaching to the homeless community.
Sure. So the funds that I manage are the ones that focus just on homelessness. I don't have the PD part of the Safe and Clean. That is through the police department. So I can't answer as to that, but I'm sorry, can you repeat what you?
Yeah, I'm curious how the current balance is meeting the needs of the homeless citizens of Ventura and the houseless citizens.
Sure.
Is it a good balance right now? Are there more civilians required? Are there more police required? How's that looking?
Yeah, so as far as outreach to our homeless individuals here at the city, we have a little bit over 500 total unsheltered and sheltered, about 380 unsheltered. So we are needing a little bit more civilian as far as our outreach workers, which is why we got the grant and we were successfully applied for that. So we can have people on the ground all the time interacting with the individuals, because the more engagement you have with somebody, the more likely they will enter into services. So we could always use some more outreach and more engagement on the civilian side. With the police department, and I'm sure Chief will talk about that, we have the Patrol Task Force, and they do a phenomenal job connecting with individuals. And I believe that that's fully staffed in that, and that's going pretty well, but I also want to defer to the chief on that. But as far as civilians, we could always use some more support on the ground with outreach with individuals.
How many folks would you say would be adequate?
That is a fantastic question. You know, I think ideally in a dream scenario, we would have somebody 7 days a week out there, right? And we would have multiples, because it isn't always safe to go in one. So we want to have 2 at all times. So four in a dream. And we currently have 2. We will
Okay.
have 1 as soon as we just actually did interviews today for the one we got with the grant. And so hopefully that individual will start within the next month.
Got it. So it would be 2 more hires then.
That would be ideal.
Okay, thank you.
I had a couple questions for you, Meredith.
Sure.
Do you guys ever work with the RISE team, county RISE team?
Yep. We work closely with the RISE team. We have something called the Community Intervention Court that meets every other week, where we talk about some individuals who are most chronic and how we can support them. And there are some individuals on the RISE team who attend that. And we also, call them as needed and to interact with certain individuals. But as you know, with our mental health system, there isn't always the threshold is high for somebody to get some assistance and to get help. So a lot of the times individuals that we see and we interact with are not meeting the threshold.
Yes, I know that well. Okay, the other question I had is, when you make your contacts with a lot of our homeless, do you have a percentage number of those that are refusing your help versus those that are taking it?
So that's a tricky question, because it depends on the level of help that you're talking about. So sure, we talk to individuals, we'll go down to the river bottom with backpack medicine, and individuals will meet with a doctor. They'll be amenable to taking the flu shot or to getting the hepatitis vaccine or reaching out to a case manager, but sometimes they won't make that appointment and they'll have to connect with them again. But as far as people who are just under the radar, not connecting with anyone at any time, it's a small percentage. I would probably say about 20% of our homeless individuals are not connecting with anybody and not accessing any resources. And a good 80% are continually meeting with the system in some way. And that's maybe with getting IDs or getting assistance with food support, or working with One Stop, getting the showers, meeting with mental health technicians, and different ways. But full 100% working with the system to get out of homelessness, that takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of effort and appointments and working with the system. And so it takes a while to get to that point, but we do have success.
The 80% number is a good number. The One Stop program you have, is it still at the hospital there, or does it move around the city to locations that are easier for the homeless to get to?
So the One Stop also partners as a whole person care, and this is a county program. They do have the physical location at Loma Vista by the hospital, and then there are two kind of satellite whole person care pods, is what we call them. And there's one outside the Santa Clara River bottom, and there's one down at the end of the avenue going towards Ojai, essentially. And they are open once a week for about 3 hours. So individuals can go there, they can take a shower, they can meet with a medical provider, they can get clothes and assistance and meet with maybe some caseworkers to work on getting them situated in order to get them out of homelessness or just to help with them in the meantime.
Great, thank you.
Did you say once a week for 3 hours?
Yeah.
To service how many people theoretically?
Well, it depends on the location. So the Santa Clara River bottom, they probably see up 30 to 50 individuals. Not everybody's taking a shower, not everybody's utilizing everything. And then the one at the avenue is a little bit fewer individuals because there aren't as many people out there. But this is through a grant that the county got, the whole person care pods. And so it is only staffed during those times. And One Stop at the physical location, that is only a Tuesday. So it's a Monday, Tuesday, and a Thursday that these locations are open.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Great. Any further questions? All right. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Hart.
Thank you.
Mr. Kuhn, who do we have up next,
Yes,
please?
next we have Miss Nancy O'Connor, our director, I messed that up. Our director for Parks and Recreation.
I knew who you meant, Michael. I knew it was me. Next slide, please. So we have a variety of programs that we work with and on. We partner with Meredith with our Safe and Clean program. We do 2 of our staff members, we have 4 altogether, our Safe and Clean team that's out there 7 days a week. 2 of them are funded out of Measure O. We also fund our Ambassador Extension program out of Measure O, and we are on track to probably spend most of our money this year. Our tree trimming, we aren't as close as we hoped it to be. Our contractor, West Coast Arborist, has been hit pretty hard by COVID. And so when we anticipated back when we did our budget that we were going to be spending a certain amount of money, it was based on how many crews that they would have in town. We had, a certain amount of trees that they were going to be trimming. And so because of the fact that they haven't been able to provide the staffing, we're not going to spend quite as much, but we're still trying to do our best. We are a little bit behind right now. Those winds a few weeks ago took a number of trees out, and it has really kept us quite busy. Unfortunately, we've taken out a number of big trees that are going to actually spend quite a bit of money out of this, the Measure O area, but we are doing our best that we can there. Our median maintenance, same thing, almost to spend all of the money that we had received from Measure O. Again, our contractors hit hard by COVID. A little bit behind in some of our work, but again, as much as we can, we're staying on top of that. We have funded our Hill Road and Avenue Library that will totally be spent. Our community granting program, we were given $100,000 for this program. We had 7 applications. We spent a little bit of money up front for a number of different items, and then we are going to end up spending $78,000. That was the ask, and everybody got completely funded. And we expect to see some of those projects going forward in the next several months. Those groups as well have been impacted by COVID. Some of them are relying quite heavily on volunteers, and they're not quite as excited to get out maybe as they were when they put their applications in. So we have granted them a little bit of extension on time. And then our park facility maintenance, which is actually our pool. While we haven't spent the money yet, we plan on spending a little bit of money of that $150,000 this year on some much needed repairs at the pool. And I believe that's my last slide. We move to the next one. And that's it. So any questions, please let me know.
Hi, Ms. O'Connor. Thank you. Can you remind me what's covered under the community granting programs? Who can apply for that, and what is that exactly?
So when we started the program, which was almost when we started Measure O, we had a couple of former city council members that wanted to do some beautification grants for the city to allow just any groups that if they wanted to apply to do some beautification on city property to go ahead and apply for this granting program. Well, it took us a little bit longer to get going than we had hoped, and then we got sidetracked by the Thomas fire. But what we ended up with is, because of the fact that we do granting programs already in our department, is that we have groups that have come and worked with their community councils. And so they've gotten not necessarily approval, but they're working in tandem with the community councils to provide some sort of a beautification project in the various areas throughout the city. And this was our first foray at it. We didn't know how it was going to turn out, but again, like I said, we did have 7 applications, and we were able to fund every one of them.
And Nancy, how are you?
Hey, John.
Hey, the parks are looking fantastic around the city. You guys are doing a great job.
Thank you. I will tell staff.
I had a question. Let them know they look terrific. I had a question on that. You mentioned median maintenance, and just out of curiosity, up by the college, I mean, I've lived here almost 60 years. That median design has never ever changed. It's kind of plain. And years ago, they did something around the mall. Is there ever any plans to change some of those? And if they are, what are they, or how does that work?
You know, I swear to God, John, we didn't set this up, but that is a project that is near and dear to my heart, and is something that I really want to jump into one day. And with my partner in Public Works, yes, Phil, I'm calling on you. It is something that we really hope that we're going to be able to do. What we would like to do is be able to take the medians and do a couple of different things, is be able to plant very drought tolerant, ocean friendly gardens, not necessarily a garden in the traditional sense, but using those type of planting materials, and then find selected areas where we could put art pieces that are made by the community that can be almost like a traveling art show, so that this could be something that could be changed out. I always like to say that the model is, if you ever go to Las Vegas and you're driving into Las Vegas on 15, they've got these huge breakaway sculptures in a lot of the interchanges, and they're built basically so that if a car hits them, they just break away. That's why they're called that. And when I was in Vegas, I had an opportunity to work with a number of projects that did that. And I would love to be able to do something like that here. It would reduce our maintenance. It would reduce our water costs. It would make it so much prettier. So that is a long-term plan for us, one that I really want to work on. And hopefully that's something that we can address in the future.
Thank you.
Is that something you're able to address on your own as a department, or does that have to go under like design review, or how does that part work?
It would first really have to go to Public Works, because if you think about it, one of the things about a median is that we have to make sure that any design is going to not impact any type of travel, any type of traffic issues. You know, like when you queue up into a left-hand turn lane, or even in a right turn lane, or when you're coming up and you have to turn left, you have to make sure that that there's visibility in all these different areas. So what we want to do is we want to start small, and we want to start in an area where we can do a test pilot, which again, not necessarily been identified, but we would start with the Public Works Department. We would do a design that we would bring to whatever, governing bodies that we would have to take a look at that to see, would that be possible to go forward? But we would start with Public Works.
So Nancy, I'm gonna go out on a limb here, but we're never gonna see those fountains working on Telegraph again by the college.
Probably not.
Okay, those are really neat when I was a kid to have those at each end. It was really a neat thing to see. Thank you.
What
I have a
fountains?
question for you. I know the city had a tree crew at one time, and I understand that that's kind of dwindled down. And so is the city contracting out most of its tree work?
No, we actually, Danny, we do have a four-person tree crew, one tree crew leader, and then three tree maintenance workers. They are a fairly brand new crew to us. They came from a contracting crew, actually came from our West Coast contractors. They've been with us. I think one of them has been with us a little over a year, and then the others right around a year. And they are just phenomenal. And they have really invigorated that tree crew. They're excited to be working. And the other thing that's really great about the tree crew, they get to work at 6:30 in the morning. And let's say something happened overnight, or somebody calls from the city manager's office and says, I need the bucket truck to go do something. Literally, we can call them and they can just drop what they're doing and go. Whereas if we had to go with our contractors, it takes a little bit of time. So we've hung on tight to that crew, and we're very, very happy to have them, and they're doing a phenomenal job.
Good to hear that. Thank you.
Questions and answers. Any other questions before we move on? All right, thank you, Ms. O'Connor. Appreciate it.
All right, and the up next, we have Public Works. I'll turn the time over to the Public Works Director, Phil Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Kuhn. Good evening, members of the committee. I'm Phil Nelson, your Public Works Director, and I'm going to go over a few of the things that we've been doing with Measure O funding this past year. You can see on the slide in front of you that the general categories or project types that we have that we've been using Measure O in one degree or another. And I'll touch briefly on each one of them. We've got quite a bit to talk about, so I won't go into great detail, but please ask any questions along the way that you might have. Next, please. So when we look at the Measure O categories, these are the three main categories that we participate in: protecting the beaches, seismically repairing our bridges, and then maintaining the infrastructure, the roads, essential services. And you can see the spending amounts that are indicated there, total of about $4.5 million. And that's spread out between operations work, day-to-day operations, and capital improvements. Next, please. We're going to go into each one of those categories, the first being coastal. I won't read the projects for you. You can do that, but you can see the variety of projects that we've been working on, the different types of things that we've been doing. We have a number of other projects that we'd like to work on. As Greg mentioned earlier, some of these we've completed, like the Hall Canyon drainage. Others are still either in design or we're still in construction. And then you see the watershed management plan is deferred. We didn't work on that this year. We expect to be working on that next year. Total of 1.2 million in this category. I guess the thing I'd like to emphasize as we kind of get ready, putting together the CIP and coming back to request Measure O for next year, is we have a backlog of unfunded work, about $72 million worth in stormwater and 21 million in coastal preservation. So there's definitely a large need out there, and the Measure O is a great help. Next, please. In our bridge category, really just have the one item that we worked on, completing our preventive maintenance plan. We'll now go out and seek the funding to implement that plan. You can see in the blue below, 65 million in unfunded need. That's largely one project, the Main Street Bridge. If you go out Main Street, headed north, go to the 101, you cross the Main Street Bridge, and that needs to be replaced. And that's about 50 million just on its own. So that kind of skews it a little bit, but we do have, people are surprised. We have, I think it's about 14 bridges around the city, and they all need some degree of maintenance or seismic reinforcing. So that's what we'll be seeking the money for there. Next, please. Definitely the biggest category we spend money in is maintaining the roads and essential services. And I've broken them down. You can see into the smaller categories being streets and sidewalks and such. 3.2 million here, mostly CIP, but a good piece of it also is in our maintenance. The citywide street maintenance and paving, our sidewalk maintenance program. We really wouldn't have a sidewalk maintenance program without Measure O funding. And then we've also done the the capital project improvements or capital improvements you can see there. Pausing for a minute on sidewalks, you may recall at our last meeting, we talked about a program that council has passed. They brought it forward and have since approved it, and we're in the process of putting it together, implementing it. It's their the $350,000 citizen sidewalk reimbursement program. That's not shown on this slide. I just mentioned that because that's something we will be coming back with in our budget request, and hopefully having an equally robust program, because there's quite a bit of work to be done in sidewalks. Alleys and parking lots, same there. Unlike streets where we might get SB1 funding or gas tax, alleys and parking lots, we can't use that money there. So it really is general fund or Measure O is about the only way we're going to maintain those critical assets. Total in this category, about $215 million worth of unfunded work right now that we've identified that we're trying to chip away and complete. Next, please. This map's it shows you the work we've done in sidewalk repair. Each one of those dots represents a repair of one sort or another. The green are completed. The yellow in the upper left along the avenue are pending. You can see the numbers there that we've completed. So the Measure O money, whether it's been operational or CIP, has really made a huge difference in our state of sidewalks. Next, please. And then finally, in our facilities category, you can see the spend there that we've had both in parks facilities, the Barranca Vista Center, some in City Hall, public restrooms, and then the piers. So there's quite a bit of work to be done on the pier, and thankfully we've had the Measure O money to work on that. This category, however, we've got a $49 million shortfall, and really the only funding source to get this work done is Measure O or general fund. Next, please. And then finally, transportation. Transportation is different from streets. Streets really is dealing with the pavement, curb and gutter, that sort of thing. Transportation is all the other elements of a vibrant transportation network. So we have 138 traffic signals across the city, and all of the control systems are antiquated, difficult to maintain. And honestly, we can't do some of the traffic control we would like to do that we think would improve transportation, because those systems just can't do that. And so we think when we have the Measure O money, we've been able to work on the design for upgrading that system. And then we'll be seeking money. We're going after grants. Somebody had mentioned grants earlier. We go after quite a few grants, and then use the Measure O as our local match to be able to leverage that grant money. You see the street light maintenance that we do, and then just the general traffic signals and signs and that sort of thing. This category has a shortfall of about $215 million. So you can see it adds up quite a bit. There's quite a bit of backlog of work that we would like to do. Thankfully, we have Measure O to get a good portion done. Next, please. I think with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Just a quick question. The traffic engineer falls under your purview?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So you have all these projects, like millions and millions of dollars of projects that you want to work on and stuff like that. Do you have, like, I know it's probably too long to list right now, like a list of all these projects, like, how do I put this? Like, when it becomes something that it's like a serious problem, like I guess the bridges, for example, do you have like an idea of when that would become a serious problem? Like it needs to be fun. Like it's better to have it funded now, but like say 10 years down the road, it might become like something where it's too serious, like you have to close it down or something like that. Like,
so we do. We don't have any of our bridges in that category yet. The Main Street Bridge, if there's never an earthquake, we're probably good for a number of years. It's the concern is if we have a large earthquake, it probably would shut that bridge down. It wouldn't collapse, I don't think. I don't think we would see probably anybody injured. It just wouldn't be usable till we were able to replace it. Our other bridges, in our assessments, we continually do assessments, all these different assets that I mentioned, the streets, sidewalks, buildings. And so that's part of the program, is determining how critical are those repairs. We try to address the most urgent ones. Life safety, of course, is always the most immediate concern, and we address those. We did down at the Promenade storms last year. We did have some problems down there. You may recall we had to close that off for a while, did some emergency repairs. So we do keep an eye on that. We're able to flex. Sometimes we have to use money intended for one project to address a critical issue on another one.
Great, thank you.
Any further questions? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you.
All right, and then batting cleanup tonight, we have Chief Schindler.
All right, good evening, Measure Council Committee. Good to see you again. Happy New Year. Can you go to the next slide, please? There we go. So again, for the police department, this is largely unchanged for the last 2 years. I have some numbers up there and some positions, but I want to go over some, now that we have a year-end stats and we're doing our crime stats for 2020, I have some good year-end and some data to give you. Largely personnel costs in all these categories. Very much personnel oriented as we go through it. I'll start off with the neighborhood drug and property crimes reduction unit. Again, largely unchanged. We still have 5 positions fully staffed there. Little history behind this. One of the reasons this unit was beefed up because Ventura has the distinction of having the highest property crime for any city in Ventura County. We average over 3,000 property crimes a year, and we found a pretty good correlation between narcotics and property crime in the city of Ventura. Its first full year being fully staffed was 2018. That year we saw a 4% reduction in property crime. Last year, its second full year, we saw the biggest reduction we'd seen in 2 decades, which was a 15% reduction over the 4% reduction the previous year. Just for those numbers don't mean a lot, but that meant 539 fewer property crimes last year, or 2019. For last year, we saw a slight jump back up by about 4.5%, but still overall, we're doing really good with a pretty large reduction in the 3 years that this unit has been together. Just some numbers they did for narcotics last year. They made 42 arrests on 64 search warrants and 52 operations, including 21 tips that came in through our narcotic tip line. And those are predominantly from neighborhoods, people that are complaining about narcotics in the neighborhoods. So they're really busy. And again, the budget this year looks like it'll be right on track to be fully expended for that unit. Enhanced patrol. This is 6 sworn positions. Right now we have 2 full-time positions. We had a little bit of an opportunity this last year with the schools not being in session. We actually reallocated our SROs, our school resource officers, to enhanced patrol. That actually allowed us to save a little bit of money. And what we did was we had 2 full-time positions. We supplemented with the SROs and a little bit of overtime here and there to basically make up the 6 full-time positions. This was born out of a high-profile homicide that occurred on the promenade a couple years, and largely, was based on community complaints stemming from crime and quality of life issues in our public spaces, the promenades, the parks, etc. Routinely, since this has been operating, I've gotten compliments on the added feeling of safety and security, especially in the downtown beach promenade area. A little component to that, just below that, is the active camera monitoring. That's actually under the same project number in Measure O. I separated it out just because this is one position that we actually have funded through extra help. So we actually use our police cadets. They monitor the cameras. We have 160 cameras right now. These are security cameras in public spaces throughout the city of Ventura. And using our cadets, we monitor that about 12 hours a day during the peak hours. When the cadets are not there, we actually have access in our command center, which is our communications or our dispatch center, and they can actually monitor the cameras as well. So they'll actually monitor them on a proactive basis, and they'll actually use them for reactions when we get calls for service. So it's been very beneficial. We've been able to see and track incidents as officers are responding to them and give them real-time information, which has been very helpful. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? Safe and Clean 2.0, and I'm going to respond to a question. I believe, Leah, you had a question earlier. These are the police positions in the Safe and Clean that operates out of the city manager's office. We have 2 sworn positions. In the picture there, you'll see 4 officers. The one person next to the bike, we actually have in the Safe and Clean and funded through the county, we actually have a behavioral health technician or clinician that works with our Safe and Clean. The philosophy of our Safe and Clean and our patrol task force is assistance-based enforcement, meaning that they offer assistance and they look at it from the perspective of providing assistance to the homeless population, and enforcement's the last resort when we have to respond to a crime that's been committed, or when we have quality of life issues that are just piling up and chronic offenders that are not taking the opportunity of Meredith's team or any of the assistance been provided to them. They work hand in hand again with Meredith's team out of the city manager's office. And typically we respond to about 20 to 30 calls per day. We actually have a report that prints out every day that I get 20 to 30 reports of some kind of disturbance involving a homelessness or a vagrancy issue. Many of those are handled through non-enforcement actions, counseling. All the PTF officers know the homeless people. They know what issues they have, whether it be mental health, et cetera. And they're doing a great job in tandem with that Safe and Clean team that Meredith manages. Sex crimes investigations, we have 1 sworn position there. It's fully staffed. This is the newest position. This one was added last year. We had 6 positions that were frozen in the police department. We were going to have 7. This was the 7th position we were going to lose. And thanks to the council, this position was funded through Measure O. This is one of the positions that when I tell people that this is probably one of my busiest investigative units in the department, they're shocked. For last year, 2020, they investigated 163 sex-related crimes in the city of Ventura, and that's 5 detectives that do that. They also are responsible for following up on missing persons, and last year they followed up on 340 missing persons. So it's quite a busy team of 5 officers, and they're supervised by a sergeant. Gang violence prevention, there's 3 positions there. It's fully staffed. They work pretty much hand in hand with our major crimes team. Used to see them out in the field a lot more doing proactive enforcement. We've gone away from that a little bit. They still do that occasionally, but now they're much more of an investigative team and an education team. And by that, the goal is prevention. So they do a lot of education in the schools. Obviously, that's been a little different this year. And they investigate a lot of the gang crimes that occur where there's some kind of gang element. Last year for 2020, these 3 investigators investigated 51 cases involving gangs or suspected gang members. And last but not least is our criminal investigations. These are non-sworn positions. There's 3 of them. They're called criminal investigative technicians. It's fully staffed. Probably one of the best things we did is add this team out there. They do 2 things. They respond to some of the cold calls. So the example I would give is if your car got broken into overnight, or maybe if there was a vandalism, they'll actually go out there and handle the report and investigation rather than a sworn officer. That allows the sworn officer to be available for some of the more urgent calls. And then the second thing they do is they actually work with our detectives and help them. They've helped write search warrants. They've helped do some of the follow-up, some of the legwork for our major investigations and our property crimes team. It's been really valuable. If I were to be able to add positions in the near future, this would probably be one of the first positions I would add because they're less costly than a sworn police officer. And the things that they do are things that enable some of the sworn positions to be freed up for other things. And next slide, please. That's it for my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. I do have some information about Safe and Clean that I wanted to add, which is one of the things they do is a reconnection program. Meredith probably knows more about that than I do, but that is reuniting many of the homeless population with family and friends They've been doing that for close to 20 years, and they've made almost 250 connections. That's been a really positive program. So that's just an example of some of the things that the police department helps the Safe and Clean team with that is non-enforcement oriented. We have other things like the community intervention court and camp cleanups, etc. But all in all, it's a team effort between all the departments in the city, not just the police and the Safe and Clean. Public Works helps us, parks help us on a daily basis. It's really a team effort when it comes to Safe and Clean and homelessness. And with that, I'll yield for any questions.
Great, thank you. I see
You're
two
welcome.
hands raised. I believe Jordana was first.
So thank you, Chief Schindler, for your presentation and especially for your collaboration with Safe and Clean. It seems to be having a really positive effect. I just wanted clarification on something on the prior slide. It said that you have one sworn position in sex crime investigations, but you mentioned that there's 5 detectives. And so how is that sworn position different from the 5 detectives?
The sworn position is one of those 5 positions. We were going to lose through the budget that occurred last year. We were going to lose one of those 5 positions. So this is just to emphasize that this is just one of 5 positions because that unit is so busy.
So is this one position funded through Measure O?
Correct. This is one position funded through Measure O. The other 4 positions are funded through the general fund.
Okay, and by fully staffed, you means that you have enough coverage for the 340 cases caseload that they're currently working?
Fully staffed means we have one position fully working and covered through the Measure O budget. If you're going to ask me how would fully staffing the whole unit be, I would tell you that would be 5 positions, and we are fully staffed that way as well. 1 Measure O funded and 4 general fund.
Okay, I see. It's just a little confusing because it says 1 position, but you mentioned 5, so just
Correct.
wanted clarification on that. And then my other question. So I guess I was like more curious about is that, so when you say something is fully staffed, that means that you have enough staff to cover the needs of that division?
So on these slides, when you look at the status, the fully staffed means it pertains to Measure O only.
Okay.
So the example I would give is the top one there, Safe and Clean 2.0. Measure O funds 2 sworn positions.
Okay.
Those 2 sworn positions are currently fully staffed.
Okay, understood. And then to digress a little bit, regarding the camera program that was installed after the high profile case of violence that you mentioned on the promenade last year. So the city landscape has changed significantly since then, because downtown is now closed to traffic, and now it's more on a pedestrian friendly environment. I'm just wondering, since that's a pretty big shift in the way that the city kind of deals with our entertainment district downtown. And I'm just wondering if that has been factored in terms of the cameras that are downtown. And I'm just kind of wondering to what extent things have changed and shifted with respect to those cameras and monitoring and foot patrols now that things are closed off to cars and we have a pedestrian friendly environment downtown.
Well, one of the things we've noticed operationally for the police department is we no longer have police cars driving through that 4 or 5 block area. And we're relying more on these officers to get out on foot and on bicycle to actually maneuver within that closed off area. The cameras have not changed positions of the cameras. We routinely get requests for more cameras, whether they be from city council members of the community, As far as the cameras go, we don't really have a set budget. It's something we're working with the city to come up with. They're kind of they're based on a complaint basis. So the latest cameras I can share with you that are currently going in near that area downtown are actually going into Mission Park, right there at the end of Main Street by the Mission. And that's based on complaints and requests from both the community and the council members. So we're actually putting cameras in Mission Park to help us with that. One of the complaints I've had recently is an uptick in vagrancy related issues in the Main Street Moves area, especially in the early mornings, people sleeping in the doorways or loitering, stealing signs, stealing things. So we work with the downtown ambassadors a lot, and either our patrol task force or the enhanced patrol officers will liaison with them to help combat those issues. Recently, we found that the homeless population was, with COVID, we were actually seeing new people in town. So we remain fluid. We've redirected some of the resources, working with Meredith's team. We've recently done some camp cleanups because of some unsafe conditions, quite honestly, and some other issues with a lot of stolen property being found in the river bottoms. So those two teams, the enhanced patrol team and the patrol task force, are pretty flexible when it comes to maneuvering downtown, the promenade, the beaches. As far as the cameras, we don't really have a good camera program that allows us to put cameras everywhere we'd like to. We kind of do that on an as needed basis or on a complaint basis. Did I answer your question?
You good, Jordana?
Yeah, I'm good. It just brought up a lot more questions, but we can address those at a different time.
All right. Thank you. I see Leah next, and then followed by Marco.
Yeah, thank you, Chief Schindler. Can you move to the left one slide? I'm curious, the numbers that you had listed, how many of those, I mean, across the board, from any sort of arrests, whether it's the breaking into the homes or the property damage or gang violence and whatnot, how many of those had led to indictments and prosecutions?
I would not have any information regarding cases filed or the results of those cases. I will tell you that typically on a yearly basis, we make about 6,500 arrests. Last year with COVID, we were down significantly in our arrests. We were in the mid 4,000s, which is a pretty big drop. We saw a big drop in proactive activity. Obviously, out of safety concerns, less traffic, less people downtown. Our aggravated assaults dropped by almost 30%. We're attributing a large reduction in the bars being open, the nightlife downtown, contributing to that. Bar fights, etc., contribute to our aggravated assaults. I'm happy, and actually, Jordana, I was going to offer this to you too. I'm happy to give you my email or phone number, and I can get some of this data for you. We do track prosecutions. We do track every arrest and whether the case gets filed. We do have some numbers with that. I just don't have them for you tonight.
Okay, thank you. And then you mentioned that with the Safe and Clean, there's one county person that you partner with and liaison with. Is that one sufficient right now? Do we need a city one, or how's that standing right now?
So we actually have two positions. One is a mental health clinician. And so that's from the perspective of many of the homeless population are not getting the treatment they need for mental health illnesses. And she will actually go out there with our patrol task force and in the field and provide assistance, offer assistance, etc. We do have a second position that is county funded. Meredith can probably talk about that a little bit more, but that position kind of bridges the gap between when we offer assistance and try to get people into programs, get them, maybe they need some job training, maybe they need a driver's license, maybe they need to see a counselor or a probation officer, whatever the case might be. The second position actually helps bridge that gap by getting these people to the services that they need. And that position is also funded by the county.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you for providing this breakdown. Just really quickly, going back to the discussion on like the number of positions, Measure O funds versus general fund, could we get like a breakdown of that, like a little bit more in detail to kind of like help visualize that so we know what the total is and how that's broken down across the general versus Measure O budget? I think that would be helpful for us.
Are you talking about specific to the police department or the whole city?
Yeah, I mean, we could do all city, but I know you're providing this breakdown by position here, so it could work for other departments too. So I opened that up for other departments, but here specifically, I know that was a topic of discussion a few minutes ago for one position versus 4 from the general. So just having that breakdown would help.
I can share with you tonight for the police department, we have 137 sworn positions. We technically officially on the books have 143, but as I mentioned, 6 of them are frozen right now. So that's 137. Of those 137, 120 are funded through the general fund and 17 are funded through Measure O. That's for the police department. That's specific to the police department.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, John.
Good evening, Darren.
John,
I couldn't see the number, or I may have missed it. In a typical year without COVID, how many SROs do you have?
3. We have 3 school resource officers. They are funded half by the Ventura Unified School District and half by the city's general fund.
That was my next question, was who funded them?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Any further questions?
That was a question I had also, Chief. Thank you.
You're welcome. If it's okay, I'm more than happy to leave my contact information. I'd love to be able to follow up with you on any of the questions I wasn't able to answer tonight. I'll do that. If I can't somehow do that, I'll give it to Michael and we can get that information to all the committee members.
Yeah, that'd be great. I don't see a chat box in this version. I appreciate you being open to the communication. That's great.
Yeah,
of course. Thank you.
Like I said, we'll forward that along for Chief to all the members.
Okay.
Of the committee.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we wrap up this segment? All right. Thanks again, Chief Schindler. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, and that was the last presentation for the night from staff.
Great. And the only other thing I see on the agenda, Mr. Kuhn, is the committee and staff communications. Can you remind me on if we need to do anything in regard to that?
Yeah, as far as a staff perspective, I don't have anything else from staff. I don't know if there are any committee updates in your request. I guess I do want to say there was a request to look at how much the city's spending on some of the water measures, or that kind of the first category that was blank. I do know, like I said, we will have that information when we come back to talk about the budget. That's one of the things we're working on gathering still.
Great. You know, I'm always looking for that info, so thank you for mentioning it.
I'd like to comment also on that. Thank you for providing information about water, and also just wanted to just remind everyone that we do want to take a look at what other non-governmental agencies, nonprofits, and what have you in the community might need to help support our initiatives with Measure O. So I'm looking forward to seeing what might be available, how the city's going to reach out to those groups so that we can hear from them as well.
Mr. Kuhn, thank you so much for putting together attachment 4B. It's really insightful to see where the city has allocated money so far, and I look forward to seeing this being updated regularly.
Oh, you're welcome. I said most of the work on that one, almost all of it actually goes to Greg Morley and his staff. So they're the ones who put the file together, and they did a great job.
Thank you, Mr. Morley.
Great. Any other comments from committee members before we wrap up? All right, hearing none, let's adjourn.
Good night, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you,
you all.
everyone.
Take care.